All right, well, this is the biggest group I've ever spoke to and the longest I'm supposed to speak, so this will be interesting. Like she said, I'll take questions all the way through and at the end, so if you have something you want to talk to me about, we can do it. I'm not an expert. I'm at least 5 miles short of that because I'm not quite 50 miles from home. So, yeah, I'm just like one of you. I'm not a professional, anything other than a farmer, and apparently that's a profession. I think it's just a lifestyle. I'm the 6th generation on my family's farm. We've been farming this ground since the 1870s. That's the home farm there. My dad and I farm together on about 1,200 acres all told. We've got some farms elsewhere on upland, but most of our farm is river bottom. That's the Iowa River on the western edge of our farm. And it seems to get a little rowdy the last couple of years. In the last 7, we've had 3 500-year floods. And every year we didn't have a 500-year flood, we had a normal flood. So it makes running row crops and running cattle a little more interesting every summer. Makes us have to do things a little bit differently than the university model. Every time I go to a presentation or a convention where they've got somebody from the universities or a professional up here speaking, an expert, I take whatever they have to say and then try and figure out how exactly it's actually going to fit in my operation, because usually it doesn't quite, and hammering a square peg into a round hole doesn't always work unless you got a big enough hammer. We run a lot of black cattle. We run mostly Gelbfie Angus crossbreds with some Hereford blood in for a white face. We sell most of ours to the local auction. We run about 80 pair cow-calf. It's not as many as we used to have. We used to run 125 pair, but we had a lot of rented pasture that after corn hit $7, the landlords decided they'd rather sell than rent, and I can't blame them for that. That was a good move on their part, but it meant we had to cull all of the cows that were 18 years old and older. They were good cows. They'd had a lot of good calves, but it was time for them to go. So we keep all our own heifers. We haven't bought any new female blood into our herd for about 20 years. We had a herd we got once that had about an 1/8 longhorn, and that was interesting. They could clear a fence that was 6 foot high, and they would eat snow. And they'd grow anywhere, but generally not where we put them. So that's what most of our cows look like now. They're big. We went after the big frame in the 80s, and we finally achieved it right about the time everybody's talking about a 1,200-pound cow. We're averaging about 1,500 pounds right now, which is a lot of meat on the ground, and that makes them real hungry, so we have to be real careful about how we feed. We've switched to doing rotational grazing thanks to the glory of Mother Nature. We have a lot of adverse conditions in the spring as far as pasture growth goes, so I try to maximize the pastures that we've got. I like to run them in grass that's about that tall and pull them out when I can see my boots. And doing so works pretty good until about mid-August. Then it gets a little short. Doesn't help when the neighbors come over to visit. Those are about 500 pelicans. And they do a great job of fertilizing, but there isn't much of a pasture left when they're done because the cows don't really want to eat where they've been. They're pretty cool to watch, though. I mean, they're big birds. They stand like that tall. Unbelievable. So we do a lot of hay growth. We do a lot of hay baling. All our hay ground is up on upland, so we don't have to get the baler stuck in the mud. It's marginal ground as far as row crops go, so it works good for hay. I do my small grains is also grown on that same ground, so I don't have to get the combine stuck in the middle of summer. We do a lot more hay than we used to because of all the flooding we've been having the last 7 years. It means we've got to have hay on hand the middle of June, and we've got to have enough of it in case we lose the whole pasture for a month, because we've done that in the past. We've done cover crops since 1997, when we had a river bottom flood out and we lost half of a cornfield. The other half we ended up chopping for silage. At that time, nobody in the area, nobody in the state really was talking about cover crops. Nobody in the Midwest was talking about cover crops. My dad was talking to guys, friends of his that were in the East Coast, and they were putting rye after their silage ground. So that's what we did on our river bottom. And it was our first year ever with rye. Since nobody in our area has ever dealt with it before, it meant nobody knew what it can do and what it can't do. We were flying blind, basically, going off of what the guys in the East Coast told us. We put it out there in, probably a week after we took corn silage off, so it would have been mid-September, thereabouts. It got up growing pretty good. I think at that point we put on about a bushel and a half an acre. It wasn't quite as thick as this. This is 2 bushels an acre. Looked great. Ran the cattle on it all fall. They grazed it off. They were fat and happy. But it was a long ways from the house. The only water access they had was ponds, and once winter hit, the ponds froze over, so we brought the cows back up to the house, and were able to feed them there on our stored feed, silage and hay and that sort of thing. Calved them out at home, and then put them on pastures. We didn't worry about the rye. We didn't even think about it. It wasn't an issue. Went in the spring to do tillage, and this ground is lowland, so you only get in at a certain time. And when the timing is right, you go whether you've got something else going on or not. And the rye, by the time we got in there, was about knee-high, which made things a little interesting to try and go and do tillage with. We should have just gone and no-tilled it, but we didn't know better. We went and disked it, and we disked it, and we disked it, and we disked it. And then Dad put the field cultivator on and sent me in to field cultivate it. Field cultivator works great like a buck rake. That was fun. Half a day later, I'd gotten about a 1/4 acre field cultivated, and we decided maybe we'd leave it alone for a while and let it mellow just a little bit longer. We ended up planting it, and the stand was pretty poor. The germination was all right, but corn came up real spotty. By fall, you couldn't tell the difference. It looked fine. So we decided that, we liked rye. We liked rye on silage ground, but we didn't like rye on ground we couldn't do anything with in the spring. So we started doing it on our silage ground up next to the house, and we've been doing it like that ever since. We do 20 acres of corn silage every year, and we do rye on that every year at 2 bushels an acre. For a long time we did a bushel to a bushel and a half, and then we decided to up it and get better growth in the fall and a lot better growth in the spring, and so that's what it looks like now. In fact, that's what it looks like right now out there. It's great stuff. Rye is one of the most resilient small grains we've got access to. It'll grow down to, 34 degrees soil temperatures. It'll handle -20. It doesn't care. In the spring, it comes up fast. It gets going hard, and the cattle love it till about early May. And then it starts getting, I don't know if it gets bitter exactly or what, but that's about the time it wants to start throwing shoots and go towards reproductive mode, and the cows don't really care much for it. They'll eat it, but they don't like it as much once it starts getting stemmy. We've had issues with it. Pretty much anything you could do wrong with it, we've managed to accomplish. We had corn following rye one year. We never will do it again, because we didn't do what all the experts are telling you to do now. At that point, nobody was talking about it at all, and we followed that rye. 3 days after we tore it up, we put corn into it and didn't add any extra nitrogen over our standard operation, and that was a bad thing to do. What everyone's saying now is wait 10 to 14 days after killing the rye to put in your corn, you won't see any problems, or put on a little extra nitrogen, or put on manure. We didn't do any of those things, and we lost, that was about a 10 bushel across the board. Yeah, about a 10 bushel yield reduction across the board on that. That was expensive because I think at that point corn had just hit $4, $4.25 for the first time. And that was an expensive mistake. We won't do it again. Like I said, if you've got the time to wait the 10 days to 14 days, the guys that do that say they don't have any problems. But we don't. We get in a hurry in the spring. We want to go, and we want to go hard and get it done. So we just don't. Well, originally they thought it was due to allelopathic properties in the soil, in the roots. They thought the rye was putting out an exudate into the soil that was inhibiting the germination of seeds, certain seeds, and corn being one of them. Now they think that has less of an effect than originally thought. Now they think it's more of the biomass decomposing right away in the soil, is robbing the nitrogen until it gets to a certain level of decomposition, then that nitrogen is released again. And so if your corn's in there, it's basically robbing your starter fertilizer. And since we don't put starter down, we just put all on at once, it was robbing that 5% or whatever that we would have had. It took it out right away, and then the corn was able to access it later, but the damage was already done right off the bat. I don't know which it is, and all the scientists I've talked to that have been working on this and studying it, none of them really know for sure either. They've been doing studies on this for the last 5 years, pretty serious, so I'm guessing they're going to have some decent data here pretty soon. When we did it, we did that about 7 years ago, and the only information I could find was studies out of France, and that information was about 10 or 15 years old at the time. So that's where they were talking about the exudate from the roots having allelopathic properties. Now, one thing we did notice with the rye, putting soybeans on it, didn't matter. We could plant soybeans into standing rye, and it didn't matter. The soybeans don't care. But what you don't have is many weeds. It's great. We don't have any weeds where we've got our rye. Every year we've done rye, we don't have weed issues. Now, not everyone has that option. I think it's partly because we put 2 bushel an acre on. We graze this really hard in the spring, and I mean really hard. It's almost bare dirt when we go to tear it up. One of the things that they talk about is the more stressed the plant is, the stronger the exudate is out of the roots, so maybe we were stacking the deck against ourselves. I don't know. But we love rye for what it can do, but it's not good for everything. And it is a pain to kill. The ground we put it on is flat. We don't worry about erosion usually with it, so we do tillage. I know a lot of guys put it on hillsides, and you don't want to do tillage on a lot of these hills, especially southern Iowa's got some really hilly ground, and it tends to walk away if you let it. And those guys are doing herbicide, and timing on herbicide on rye is crucial, because if you let it get away, you're going to fight it the rest of the season if you're putting corn on it. Again, if you're putting beans on it, they don't seem to care as much. So it's not as big of a deal, but it looks bad. So we've been doing the rye, and when I came back from Florida, we started looking at some other options, because at that point was when we started getting all these extra floods that we weren't really counting on. And we were eating into our hay supply real hard. One year we had 1 hay bale left the 15th of June for the whole herd. And that made me really nervous. I said, now that's not a good situation to get into when you're down to the point where you don't have any stockpiled forage and you have a tendency to lose half of your pasture for a month. That's not a good place to be. So we started looking at other options, ways to extend either our hay, get more hay, or get some better grazing or something. And so we got into looking at other options. We went to wheat on soybean ground, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. We went to oats. I tried some oats. The first year I was back, I had read in a magazine somewhere, guys in the East Coast were using, they were broadcasting oats and wheat and rye into standing soybeans in the fall at leaf yellow. Nobody around here was doing that at the time. I wondered if it was possible here. Like Pennsylvania can do things that we can't get away with north of I-80. They grow radishes in September and we can't. But I wanted to try it and see if it worked, the broadcasting, and we didn't have anything really that was built for that. I had a little Ferguson tractor, like a Ford 9N, and a 10-bushel 3-point broadcaster. So I rigged that up and got some bin-run oats and went out and broadcast a 10-acre field that was way away from the road. For once, I did an experiment that nobody could actually see. And, of course, this one worked perfectly, right? Yeah, that's how that works. The ones that don't work, the ones that are right next to the road, and the ones that do, or nobody can see them. But I did 10 acres of 2 bushel of bin-run oats on standing soybeans. They were just at leaf yellow. And at that time, we were on 30-inch rows, so it was pretty easy to stay where I needed to be and not drive on too many beans. I was worried about driving on and knocking beans over and then losing the yield. So I waited till late in the day when the beans were all soft and weak, and they'd lay over and then come back up in the morning. It worked out really well. I didn't drive on too many beans. It didn't knock anything off. Didn't knock any pods off. Good deal. We had perfect fall weather for that fall, and when we went into combine, the growth was good on the oats, and I was talking to my neighbors. They were giving me a hard time saying I was going to be running a bunch of green material through the combine. I was like, well, it's only 10 acres. It's not a big deal. When I rolled in, the oats were about 4.5, 5 inches tall. I cut the top inch of oats off with the bean head, and that was it. It was perfect. Went right through it. When I got done, that field was green, just like a pasture. It was gorgeous. Of course, it doesn't have any fence around it, so I couldn't run cattle on it. So that worked out well. But it did prove to me that it can work, that the broadcasting in standing soybeans could work. And then we did it the next year. I decided to go big, and I went out and got me a high-class piece of equipment right there. That is a mid-1960s Han Highboy, and that is a fantastic piece of junk. I bought it for junk price, and they didn't know if it'd start or not. We put some gas that wasn't turpentine in it, and it fired right off and ran. I'm like, yeah! We took the boom off it and put a 10-bushel broadcaster off the back end, which I probably should have put some weight on the nose, because going up a hill, she kind of got a little hoppy. But I went and that'd be 08. We went and broadcast on 35 acres. Now, the GPS unit wasn't functioning on this particular model, so we've got a few gaps in the seeding pattern. But that's what 2 bushel of winter wheat looks like on soybeans after they get harvested. Now, I put that on at leaf yellow soybeans. This particular field, the beans at the top were yellowing, the beans at the bottom were green as a gourd, which is why we've got a gap about every 60 feet instead of every 30 feet. Because when I got down to the bottom of the field, I couldn't find my row. I kind of guessed, and I was close. Looks like I was about 10 feet off, pretty much consistently. It worked out great. The bottom of the field did not do as well as the top of the field because the bottom was fully canopied still, and it was still green. When we got the rains, the seed may have germinated, but it didn't have enough sunlight to keep going. Up at the top, the leaves fell on top of that seed and acted like a mulch, keeping all the moisture right where it needed to be, and when the seed got above the mulch layer, it had sunlight and took off. And so it worked really well. Now, I used wheat instead of rye because of our problems following rye with corn, because this was going to go to corn the next year. We've done this, not with the Highboy necessarily, but we've done this every year since then. It works fantastically well for grazing cattle. This is where we calve every spring. The spring of, what was it, the spring of 08, maybe? No, yeah. One of those springs was absolutely wet. We had a hell of a time. It was awful. We had mud. I lost calves. I was pretty disappointed with calving in mud. I don't think it's a great plan. The next year when we had the wheat on, we calved into it, and it was like calving on pasture. It was like calving in late May, early June on fresh grass. The cows were all spread out. They didn't bunch up at the bunk. When they dropped their calves, they were dropping them on fresh, dry grass. Beautiful. The calves worked out awesome. And we've... What's that?
When do you calve?
At that point, we did heifer calving in March, and the rest of the main herd was April 1st through June. I have shifted everything now. We don't start calving until about the 10th of April because I don't like the weather in March. And I don't have good facilities to bring animals inside more than one at a time. So if I have 2 or 3 cows that have problems in March, I can't bring them in. I don't like that. So we put them into April and later, and we have stopped having any major issues. Partly because I think we've got them on this. They spread out. They don't stand at the bunk all winter long, and they get exercise. And I think that's a big part of our calving issues anyway.
So then when you planted corn into that field?
We planted corn into this field. We tore it up. We hit it with the ripper because we had cattle on it for so long, they'd really packed it in the spring. And that's one of the downsides of running cattle on any ground. If you run them in the mud season, they're going to put a layer of compaction, but also they're going to work that ground up a little bit. And even our no-till planter tended to hop over those cowpocks. So we worked that ground. And that would have been planted probably late April, early May, maybe the first week of May. And it would have been, what we normally do, we do within 3 days. So we'll go in with like a ripper if we have areas of compaction, if we fed. We'll rip it, disc it, plant it within 3 days or less. Most years we try to do it within 18 hours because if we can run it, we run it hard and fast, and then we move on to the next field. We've discovered with cover crops it works best to work it a little bit damper than conventional tillage ground because you can get in and it breaks up beautifully. It just kind of blows apart like good sod. The soil conditions are fantastic, even after running cattle on it. Love it. I did throw oats in here to try out the broadcaster that first year just to see what the difference is. And so the oats are in the top left corner and the wheat's in the rest of it. The oats in the fall put up a straight growth, whereas the wheat kind of grows sideways, and so does rye. So the oats would give me a lot more grazing right off the bat in the fall, and then, of course, the winter kill, and so there won't be anything left of them in the spring, whereas the wheat will be there in the spring. So that was just an experiment to see what it was going to look like. I put oats out this year with my rye, and then they winter killed way early because we got that really early frost. Well, that really hard frost early, and that took care of that. So the next year after the high boy deal, before I get there. So the last pass of that field, I was running the high boy up the hill. Last pass, I'm almost empty. I hear this bang! And everything just kind of starts shuddering. And I look back, and the broadcaster's dancing on the back of the high boy. I'm like, uh-oh, I got a problem. So I pull her in, and I'd completely shattered the housing on the bottom of the broadcaster. I'm like, well, I'll fix that later. It's still later. We haven't fixed it yet. So then I got to talking with some folks. I got involved with Practical Farmers of Iowa, and that's a great organization. They do a lot of experimentation with different ideas, and that's where I get some of my crazier ideas. And some folks in that group were getting pilots to fly on wheat and rye and that sort of thing. I said, that sounds a lot easier than me going out there and doing all the seeding myself. So the next year we flew on wheat at 2 bushels an acre at the same time we were chopping corn silage. I like that. I don't have to mess with it. I get the seed to the dealer and it goes away. And then they put it on and I get other work done. We got tied in with a whole group of us local farmers every year, and we all do it at the same time, which makes the pilots happy because then they get a whole bunch of work done all at once. Instead of doing your 20 acres and then they've got to go another 30 miles to do another guy's 20 acres. Every year we've been covering, between us and 5 other farmers, we've covered over 300 acres. And that makes the pilots happy because they get to do everything at once. They get bulk shipment in. We go and get the wheat ourselves because I don't like spending money that much. And I do bin run. We drive 100 miles with a semi to get bin run wheat at $8 or $9 a bushel instead of buying it bagged at $18 to $25 a bushel. So if we get it half price, it's worth the drive. If you want to do something like that, I highly recommend it. If you're in central Iowa, you're screwed if you want to go local. We drive to Iowa City every year for wheat. It's not fun. The roads suck. But we've got it, and it's cheap. I've started doing small grains now because I'm tired of the drive. And so we're going to be running mostly our own from now on, just to save the extra hassle. But this is great. I love flying it on. I love the way it looks when it's done. This year, I wish I'd gotten a picture of it because, of course, I didn't. It was the best stand we've ever had, ever. It was perfect, flawless, unbelievably gorgeous. As soon as we got done combining it, 3 days later, you couldn't see that it had been a bean field. The wheat grew up straight and tall and covered the bean stubble. It looked like a field of wheat and nothing else. Awesome. Unbelievable growth. I really should have gotten a picture of that. But I didn't. This was our first year flying it on, and the pilot did a really good job. The one thing I've noticed, you can tell there's a big difference between one pilot and the next. There's a big difference between one company and the next. Timing is critical, but so is the quality of the applicator. I've seen guys that have stripes in their fields. They look like that when they pay someone else to fly it on. Now, if you do it yourself and you screw up like that, you just kind of laugh and say, well, yeah, I did a bad job. If you paid somebody else to do that, you'd be mad. Thus far, we've had really good luck with the pilots flying, and I'm glad for that. I've talked to guys that have awful, awful experiences, and they still do it, but they're paying a lot of money for a mediocre job. Pays to shop around. The timing of flying it on is critical. We did one year where the pilot had mechanical issues with the plane and had to quit halfway through the day, and it was quite literally halfway through the field. So he parked it for 3 days, and in those 3 days we got about a half-inch of rain. Now he came back and finished the field, and he got her fixed and did everybody else's fields. And you could see all fall the line where he'd had to quit and wait 3 days, and we'd gotten that rain. Because where we'd gotten the rain on it after seeding, the wheat was beautiful. Green looked like that. Everywhere that was after that rain, the wheat was sparse. It looked like crap. It was barely green in the fall. And we thought, well, okay, at least we got half a crop to graze. Great. It's something. It's better than nothing. We didn't spend a lot for the seed. All right. In the spring, you couldn't see the difference across the field. There was zero difference in that stand in the spring. It was unbelievable. I should have taken a picture of that too. But I didn't know I was going to be presenting here at that time. Now, that's what 2 bushels of wheat look like. That's what 1 bushel of wheat looks like flown on. The difference in this is supposed to be 2 bushels, and we had a miscommunication because I didn't write something down, and I should have. And so hillsides that would have been really nice and deep, deep green instead just kind of have a green cast to them. Now, if all you want to do is hold the ground, that's going to do a great job of that. And we've got some of the farmers in our group that's all they want it for. They're not running cattle on it. They're just going to hold the dirt. They're doing it for erosion control, and it does a fantastic job at that. And it's also, when it's this sparse, it's a lot easier to kill. If you want to graze it, I highly recommend upping your rate, because then you've got that nice deep green. You've got a lot of foliage even in the fall. We've got cows on it right now. We've got hay out for them. They haven't touched it. They've been on it for a week now, and they aren't even looking at the hay. They don't care. They don't care. Dad went out and gave him some silage the other day just to see if they were hungry, and they chased him around the field thinking he was going to give him some, give him some sport, basically, because they went and played with the silage, but they didn't really eat much of it. It's still out there. They're just not hungry. They've got plenty of grass there. But the cows on this are eating hay. They're eating extra forage because they aren't getting enough off of that. They're out there grazing every day. They're getting exercise, but they're not getting near the calories that they should have been getting if we'd have had 2 bushel on that. So I highly recommend upping the rate. Now, it's not cheap. Bin run wheat this year I think is going to cost us about $9 a bushel. Bought in wheat in a bag, the cheapest I was able to find this fall was $18 a bag. Most of it was above $20 a bag. So if you're putting 2 bushel on at $20 a bag, you're spending an awful lot of money just on seed. The cost of flying this year was raised a little bit. I think we ended up spending about $13.50 an acre to fly it on. So you're well over $30 an acre just to get your cover crop on. You'd better graze it to get all the benefit out of it. The guys that are talking about, I hear the seed salesmen talk about you're going to boost your yields if you do cover crops. You're going to do that. We haven't seen a yield boost from running cover crops. We've seen increased soil tilth. We've seen other benefits, but we haven't seen a yield bump. We've seen a yield drag when we screwed up our management, but that was our fault, not the cover crop. But we haven't really seen a yield boost, so that's kind of a load of BS. Now, there's a cumulative effect. If you do it for like 5 or 10 years straight, you start seeing some actual benefits. If you do it for 1 year, you're not going to see a whole lot of difference. Now, that's doing something like this where you're hitting it pretty hard. You're not giving it the maximum benefit to the soil. Running cattle on it means we're using everything that we put out there this year. I'm not going after increased soil tilth. I'm not going after a yield boost on my grain crop. I'm going after feed for cows. That's a big difference than the guys that are going after that increased yield. Now, right now, I'm not too worried about corn hitting 250 bushels an acre because I don't care. I want my cows fed, and I want them fed as cheap as possible. This is cheaper than making hay. This is cheaper than hauling hay. This is cheaper than buying hay. And I'm not hauling anything to them right now. They're out there eating, and they're doing their own thing just like they did all summer. I love it. I don't even have to have good fences to keep them in. Single-stranded hot wire works great as long as nothing spooks them. It's a whole lot easier. And life's too short to work that hard all the time. Now, here's one of the added benefits of cover crops. Last year, things got a little wet. Last year, the RMA decided that crop insurance rules were going to be changed, and they were going to regulate grazing cover crops. And they said after a certain calendar date, you had to remove your cows from the cover crop because it was no longer a benefit and it was going to start hurting your grain crop, which is a load of crap, but they said it, and so we had to follow it. So we pulled the cows off on the day they said we had to. We put them down on pasture. That afternoon, Dad went out and disked half the field. It started raining a little bit, so we parked it. We figured when it dries down, we'll go and work the rest of the field and plant. The next day, it rained 15 inches, and we didn't get right back in the field right away. But you can see where he disked up to and where he stopped. And the rain, 15 inches of rain is not something we get normally, so it was quite an experience to watch it hop terrace after terrace after terrace of our neighbors, run across the road, which it had never been across in anyone's memory, and run through our rather flat field like it was coming off of a D-slope. The water cut to the bottom of the trench of the disc. Everywhere the disc went, it cut down to the bottom where the blades had cut, except where it hit the wheat that hadn't been worked. There, it bent the wheat over, and that was it. We didn't lose any dirt. From where it hooked over and then hooked back across, as soon as it hit that wheat line, it was running across the top of the ground and not scouring. And as soon as it got back off of that wheat and into the disc ground, boom, we had a 4 or 5 inch gully all the way to the bottom of the field. That was kind of an eye-opener to me. I mean, I knew it held soil fairly well, but I didn't expect it to do it against that. That's an extreme case. It was very impressive. And the other thing that impressed me most was, that's our pasture down here. It's a little wet this day. The next day it was a lot wetter because it had 6 more feet of water on it. The cows we brought up that morning. When it started raining like this, we brought all the cows up to the house. We said, oh, it looks like it's going to get wet. We pulled the cows up off the bottom so we wouldn't have to go swimming. It was a good move, but we didn't really have anything. We had a dry lot, which was not very dry for 50 pair. 50 pair with about 30 very, very new babies. So since we didn't have anywhere else to put them, we put them back out on the wheat. And that was a great move because out on that wheat, the calves were able to get up where it was a little bit drier, dry being a relative term at that point. But when we hauled them feed and everything, they were still able to go out and graze. They were still able to have space for the calves. They were dropping calves in something that wasn't 3 feet of mud. That was a great benefit that we hadn't really counted on. I'm really glad that we were able to do that, though. If we hadn't had the wheat, we'd have been screwed. I'd have lost a lot of calves. We still lost some to the mud, but not as many as we would have otherwise. Now, that same year, I lost 70 acres of corn because it went under 8 feet of water because this was a little bit farther downhill. And the insurance company was so busy that summer, they didn't get around to releasing it until the end of July for me to do anything with. At that point, the Soil Water Conservation District had come up with a whole bunch of cover crop money, and so we went and got our share and were able to put in oats and radishes. That's one of the big things everybody's talking about in the magazines is tillage radishes. Woo! Tillage radishes are awesome. And they are if you put them on at the right time. We put this on the beginning of August last year, and the oats and radishes came up beautifully together. They were very companionable. They didn't compete with each other not at all. The oats ended up being about 18 inches high, and so were the radishes by the time the killing frost hit and the field stayed green all fall, all winter, and into the spring. Now, if I'd had a fence around this, I could have grazed it, but of course, there was no fence. So I couldn't use it for grazing. So all it was for soil health, I guess you could say, and to catch all of the fertilizer and everything that I'd spent money on and keep it there. The radishes got, like they show in the pictures, they got about that big around and about that long with a nice long taproot. I was like, hey, it actually can work. Because the previous year I tried radishes in September into standing soybeans, and I got a radish root the size of my pencil. That is not like the pictures. And for the cost of that seed, I will never do that again. Radishes work great if you give them enough time. I talked to some folks that were able to put them on the 4th of July that year, and they had radishes the size of my arm. They are incredible. But that's in July and August, which most row croppers don't really want you out there with a drill in their fields. It seems to make them angry. Now, I did have the cows actually get out and end up grazing this for about 3 hours, and they loved it. And I did not love it so much because then I had to get them back in, and I also was behind them at the time, and you want to be well behind them. Because that's an awful lot of lush growth. And it has a particular aroma coming out the back end of a cow, and you will know when they get into a brassica field because, wow, that's got its own little funk to it. Now, the beautiful thing with this one, on the row crop end of things, in the spring, all that growth, 18 inches of growth, it was knee-high when I walked through it when you had a killing frost. Let's see, we got in late April to plant that this year. No, it was mid-May because we put beans. Mid-May this year, it looked like just a carpet of dead grass, and not 18-inch tall dead grass like that. There's almost no residue left. It was beautiful. It's like, we don't have to do anything, no tillage necessary. Great, we just set the planter for no-till, put it in, and buried it. Apparently 300 pounds of down pressure is a little much when you get out of the tractor and you kind of float. That ground was so fluffy, we had to dial the planter pressure all the way back to conventional tillage in order just to keep it planting where we needed it to. It was fluffy to an extent I've never seen before. So there's one instance where cover crops actually do improve soil tilth in one season, but we had to put it in August in order to gain that and not run cattle or anything else to it. So perfect conditions elicit perfect conditions. Now, this year I signed up, because it works so well to work with Soil Water Conservation District, I went through the NRCS and I signed up for a CSP contract on that same farm. And so now I will be putting cover crops on every year on this ground. Now, this ground, again, doesn't have any fences, so I'm not going to go after grazing potential. So this year on soybean ground, oats and rape broadcast at leaf yellow. Well, sort of leaf yellow, because guess what? We flooded again this year, and this was under 6 feet of water. Now, the soybeans were this tall when it flooded 6 feet of water, and it was on for about a week. I expected there to be nothing there. When the water receded, I was proved wrong. I ended up pulling 20 bushel beans off of that ground, which I couldn't believe. In part, I'm going to hope that it was because we had cover crops on it. I don't really know. It could just be a freak occurrence, but on 70 acres, when you pull 20 bushel beans off of something that's been underwater 6 feet, that's weird. It's cool, but it's weird. So I broadcast oats and rape, and it was spotty in places because the beans were spotty in places. Anywhere the canopy had already come off, the oats didn't grow. The oats germinated and died. They got baked. The rape did a decent job of growing over all of it. We went with rape because it's much hardier. It handles the cold weather a lot better, and it grows really quick. This picture was taken right after the first frost we got after soybean harvest. Now, when we went through picking soybeans through this, the oats and rape were about 3 inches tall, so they didn't even get into the head. Really, they painted the sickles green, and that was about it. This is what happens when you run out halfway across the field. That's what the field would have looked like. It would have been just straight up bean stubble and nothing else, and instead it was a beautiful green carpet. I mean, it was gorgeous. This picture doesn't do it justice. Standing in the field, it was unbelievably green. It was beautiful. Now, they didn't get very tall. This was at the killing frost. The beans, or the oats and rape, were only about that high. So did I get a lot of biomass out of that? No. Could I have gotten a lot of grazing out of that? Not really, but on 70 acres it would have done something. Been better than feeding hay. But since I couldn't run cattle on it, this is just for row crop and for soil improvement. I'm hoping I get some benefits next year. We'll see what happens. Now, we've played with crimson clover. They talked about that some. That used to be one of the buzzwords, just like radishes crimson clover is going to be the next thing you put in, and you get nitrogen fixed in the fall, and you'll be able to plant corn into it and not put any nitrogen down. Not quite right. We tried that in just a pass or two. Again, this time I did it where nobody could see it, and it did not work. We had it grow we put it into standing soybeans. It grew kind of. We had spotty germination and growth, and when it frosted off, it was gone. And I mean, one frost, it wasn't even what I'd call a killing frost. It was a light frost. That stuff turned black and disappeared. Gone. Now, so I said, well, we're never going to use this in the fall again because it didn't get enough growth on it to justify the cost. Crimson clover is a very expensive seed. I put it in my garden because I had about a coffee can's worth extra that I didn't use, so I had a patch in my garden that I was going to leave fallow. I threw it out there. That's what it looked like. It was 18 inches to 2 feet tall. Beautiful, beautiful, bright red flowers, very lush growth. And when I plowed it down, it disappeared into the soil. It was broken up immediately. I was like, okay, that's great if you're going to put it in early in the spring, if you're going to put it in the summer and not put it in the fall. But it's expensive seed, so I probably won't do much playing with it unless I'm going to put it somewhere that I've got the time. But it broke down nicely. They say it's a great green manure as opposed to grazing. I'm guessing it's too expensive to graze. But now this year, again, since we had it flood on one side of the farm, it also flooded the other side of the farm because the river went across it. And this is my dad's cornfield. There's 65 acres, and of the 65, we lost 25 of it to the river. And the rest of it, we still had a decent corn crop. This corn was as tall as I am. It was a little over 5 feet high when the river came up. The river went above the corn, about here. And it was there, again, for about 7 days. We said the whole field's gone. When the river came back down, there were islands of corn. So we left those islands and tore the rest of it up and put oats and turnips. We did that the end of August, I believe. This picture was taken the beginning of November. Yes, this was taken about the 1st of November. Those oats and radishes, or oats and turnips, sorry, the oats were about 2 feet tall for the most part, except in the really low spots like they're right there in the middle. They grew really well. Anywhere the oats did well, the turnips did not. Anywhere the oats didn't do very well, the turnips did awesome. There's definitely some competition there. Turnip seed is not as cheap as rape, but I wanted to graze this because, hey, we have a fence on this one. I can use it. And so we did that. We ran cattle into it on the 1st of November, and they went out and ran across the field kicking up their heels and bellowing and running around. Good, I'm almost done. Perfect. And they stayed out there for 3 weeks without eating any hay. We put them in the 1st of November. We just pulled them off last week. We fed 6 bales of hay, and that was all in the last week and a half. So for 3 weeks straight, they didn't eat anything other than the oats and turnips and the corn stalks. Right now, if you drive by that field, because it is right next to the road, the stubble is about that tall of the oats, and that's it. There's nothing else out there. They cleaned it, they ate it, they loved it. They're fat, they're sleek, they look like they've been on full feed. And I had 80 cows on 65 acres for 3 weeks without feeding anything to them. I was really impressed with that. I like that. But again, we put the oats and the turnips in August, so we got a lot of growth. If we had put it in October, we would have had nothing. So timing is really crucial. These crops, all these cover crops, need to be timed out right. If you put it in too late, you don't get what you want. If you don't watch how you manage it, you have real issues. And there's the required photo that everybody seems to have for cover crops. They have that arm-sized radish. Well, there's a big turnip. That one's about that big. And that was grown not in the middle of the oats. That was where the oats didn't do well. That's how big the turnips got. Anywhere the oats were good, the turnips were the size of my pinky. But the cows loved them anyway. They ate them all. So, except for a 5-gallon bucket I picked for my neighbor because he likes turnips. One other thing I want to say, I don't know if you can see, but there's stripes right up along here. That's the anhydrous pass. In the spring, we put anhydrous on this ground, and everywhere the anhydrous toolbar went, you could see the oats were 6 to 8 inches taller, and they were so green they were almost black. They were sucking up that nitrogen that the corn wasn't able to. That keeps it from leaching in my mind, and most of it went through the cows, so it got spread out in a much more diversified pattern, shall we say. All right. So when I set this slideshow up, it was 10 degrees outside and snowing and windy. And that wasn't that long ago, so this is the one thing that was on my mind.